Hello, my name's Jan Bridget. I'd like to welcome you to my free online training programme, which is called Homophobia Awareness from a Multi-Oppression Perspective. And this is session 4. Session 4, Homophobia Effects on Lesbian, Gays and Bisexuals, is divided into 4 subsections. 4A, Internal Effects. 4B, External Effects. 4C, the combined effects of internal and external, and 4D, continued minority stress. With regard to transgender issues, there are a lot of similar issues to those facing lesbians, gays and bisexuals, but there are also some important differences. The coming out process, for example, can be different. Some transgender people identify first as gay and then later as trans. Trans people can be heterosexual, homosexual or bisexual. Research clearly shows that there are higher levels of mental health problems amongst transgender people. My advice is that you bring in a specialist trainer on trans issues. Although there is information on the Gaelic website if you look in the support section, coming out, other publications. I want to point out that bisexuality is an orientation in its own right. However, it's important to note that some people identify as bisexual as part of the coming out process before they accept that they are lesbian or gay. Bisexuals are subjected to the biphobia of both heterosexuals and homosexuals. Some research suggests that bisexuals are more vulnerable than either heterosexuals or homosexuals. The majority of LGBT people we see in the media tend to be white, middle-class men who live in urban areas and have access to a social scene and LGBT support services. There are many other lesbians, gays and bisexuals, however, who live in rural areas and small towns where there are no support services geared to meeting their needs. They can also be very, very isolated. It's much more complicated as well for people who experience more depression, i.e. they're LGBT, black and minority ethnic or disabled or working class, etc. I'm now going to look at the internal effects of homophobia on lesbians, gays and bisexuals. You should recognise this next slide. It's all of the words and phrases that people have heard said about lesbians, gays, bisexuals, homosexuals. The point is, we start hearing these words when we're very young and we internalise them. What this does, in effect, is to create a spoilt identity. I'm now going to show you 2 extracts from television programmes. The first one looks at how a mixed race young person internalises racist messages, and the second one looks at how disabled people internalise negative messages about disableism. So what in effect I'm saying is that the system works the same against all minority groups. We internalise the negative messages.
And personally I think, some schools could do a lot better, especially schools that they think is predominantly white, therefore they don't need to do anything because, we know that white children start learning to be superior from a very early age, the same time as when black children start learning to feel inferior.
We're very aware from mixed race to family that the race issue has to be addressed right from a very, very early age. We've actually done it in terms of raising the issue in terms of the fact I am white and his mother's black and he's brown, if you want. And the wonderful thing about this place is that just reinforces what we're trying to do at home. So in fact, he's growing up in an environment where he feels that if he's got his roots through his black grandparents and his roots through his white grandparents, that's all part of what makes him a rich individual.
We're going to be painting our handprints, and to do that...
The needs of children who have a black and a white parent are recognised at Camplin Early Years Centre in South London. The staff find that some of these children have already picked up messages leading them to deny part of themselves.
Are you a black person or a white person?
A white person.
Are you? If I was going to ask you to choose a colour to paint yourself, what colour do you think you would use for you?
That one.
That one there. Would you put
Children at this age are forming their sense of identity. The centre provides an environment where children of mixed parentage are encouraged to see themselves positively as black, in preparation for the fact that the society around them will see and treat them as such. It is a process which has to involve the parents and the whole extended family.
Well, I would say that in about 90% of charity advertising, if not more, the imagery of disabled people is very, very negative. The idea behind the posters is that you sell fear or you sell the tragedy of people with disabilities.
Charities raise money to help people, but people with disabilities feel that the imagery which they use is negative, very different from how they see themselves, which is that they're disabled by society and not by their disability. Jane Campbell's personal experience reflects this.
I know that until I was about 24, 25, I had taken on board all that the charities and other charitable bodies and organisations had said about me. I felt that I was unemployable. I felt that I would always need to be cared for, that I didn't have the ability to live an independent and autonomous life. It was only when I met up with other disabled people who were able to politicise me and to actually allow me to get rid of a lot of this internalised oppression, which had been dumped there by this imagery, that I was able then to turn it on its head and see that actually the problem of disability wasn't my own, it wasn't a burden that I had to carry around myself, and that it actually belonged out there.
Other people have shared similar experiences, like David Heavey, who now works as a photographer.
Up until about 4 years ago, I was working as a grill chef, and I was a sort of closet epileptic, and I'd been through a lot of other movements, labour movement, the rest of it, and realised I'd carried this kind of internal demon. I then came across the disabilities movement, which talked about the social model of disability and the medical model, and it was like having the blinding flash on the road to Damascus, and insofar as it showed me a way of externalising self-blame and self-hate and the personal crisis of epilepsy. And in that journey out of that, I took a camera, if you like, and recorded the journey, and became a photographer working for the disabilities movement, recording that conversion from private medical model to political social model.
I want to try and explain this in another way with regards to lesbians, gays and bisexuals. And to do this, I'm going to turn to Richard A. Friend's model, which he was developed with regard to older LGBs. But I actually think it's just as relevant nowadays for older LGBs in Britain, some older LGBs, and possibly for some young LGBs as well. Anyhow, there's three sections: the stereotypical option, the passing option, and optimal affirmation. The person who belongs to the stereotypical option conforms to negative beliefs that they've internalised. They hide their sexual orientation, they live with shame and self-loathing and guilt, they feel alienated, lonely and depressed, and they live in a secret world. They hide all or parts of themselves from family and friends. This creates a wall of separation and distance. The contact with the family is often quite superficial, and they're distanced and isolated from other lesbians and gays. It's unlikely that people who belong to this group will develop support from lesbians and gays to challenge the internalised negative images. The second option is passing. People who belong to this group are a little less isolated. They don't totally accept all of the negative messages they've internalised. They still believe heterosexuality is superior, but they marginally accept same-sex orientation. They not fully accept themselves because they feel valued for what other people expect of them rather than for who they actually are. Sometimes they can be married or in a relationship with a heterosexual to pass. They keep a distance from out, identifiable lesbians and gays, and if they do link up with them, they do it in such a way so that they still appear to be straight. These kind of people live in two worlds: the public, pretending to be straight world, and the secret world of who they actually are. There are actually very high emotional costs to living this kind of life. The final group is called optimal affirmation outcome. These people grew up in a hostile environment, but rejected the negative images and adopted a positive identity. Some did this through personal and political activism. This can also apply to young LGBT people who access support through an LGBT youth group. They're likely to be open and out and accepted by their families of origin. They encourage the families to challenge homophobia. They're likely to attain a high psychological adjustment, and a lot of research tends to reflect this group because they're the most visible. In order to complete this section, I'd like you to have a look at 3 videos from YouTube, but you're going to have to go back to the description of this session to be able to click on the links to access them. The first one is about a young black lesbian, and the next 2 are from the film Adopted. What I found is, looking at this film, is that a lot of the ways that young Asian people or Chinese people who were adopted by white families in America, they feel very much like young lesbians and gays, LGBs, probably transgender people growing up in this country with heterosexual parents. The similarities are quite important and quite astounding, really.